Good afternoon. I'm Jane Campbell. I was the mayor of Cleveland in the early 2000s, and since that time I've been doing a wide variety of things, and most recently I've been working as a senior advisor with Public-Private Strategies on making the Opportunity Zone promise real for the communities that we serve. So this is an important webinar today because we have a great new tool that we want to share with you. But I, of course, have to do certain housekeeping matters. Number one, the webinar will be recorded, so if you want a recording, that will be possible afterwards, and the slide deck will also be available to those of you who have registered. We are prepared to include questions in the conversation. There's a chat box on your webinar feature, and so if you put your questions into the chat box, even during the time of the conversation, I will try to make sure that those questions get directed to our distinguished panelists. So please use the chat box for that purpose. All of the listeners are on listen-only mode, so you don't have to worry about muting your phone. Just our panelists are ones that can speak at this point. So that being said, let us move into the important information. The Public-Private Strategies is a boutique small business that really focuses on the intersection between government and business and tries to make the connection between government, business, and philanthropy in particular. And we have been working with the Opportunity Zone incentive, working with philanthropy groups, working with community groups about how do we really take this tool, which is brand new, was just developed in the tax reform, it was just made law in the tax reform bill, even though the discussion had been going on for several years within the Congress. And, you know, sometimes it's important to think about with people's general sense that everything going on in Congress is hyper-partisan and divisive. The creation of the Opportunity Zone incentive was a bipartisan, bicameral initiative that really was worked on by people from a wide variety of backgrounds. And so that's why it's important that each community grab a hold of the opportunity that's created and make it work for the people who you live with and serve. Today's webinar is designed to offer an inside look at the Mastercard Center on Inclusive Growth, new Inclusive Growth Toolkit, and to really look at how data-driven insights can influence investments and outcomes for Opportunity Zone communities. You can see here the agenda that we've laid out to achieve these goals, and we are going to save time at the end for questions, but again, if you put them in the chat box, we'll include them as well. We are fortunate to have today not only the leader of the inclusive growth activities from Mastercard, but also a representative of the White House, because the White House has taken this Opportunity Zone incentive as a guide to really focus on investing in underinvested communities. So we'll introduce both of those as we move forward. First order of business is for me to introduce you to Arturo Franco. You can see his photograph so you can imagine him when you hear his voice. Arturo is the Vice President of Data and Insights at the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. He's a development economist and a strategy consultant. His career combines several high-level positions in Fortune 500 corporations and global organizations with a public policy and international development experience as well. Before joining Mastercard, Arturo was a senior advisor for McKinsey & Company's Global Public and Social Policy practice and the executive director of the Planning Council of the state of Nuevo León, where he also served as the undersecretary. Over the past years, Arturo has been Global Leadership Fellow for Latin America at the World Economic Forum, Economics Research Fellow at Harvard's University Center for International Development, a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and a member of the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Arturo holds economics degrees from Monterrey Tech in Mexico and Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, where he served as vice chair of the alumni board. His essays and books have been published by Brookings, the Woodrow Wilson Center, the Atlantic Council, and the Policy Network. So, Arturo, why don't you tell
Hi.
the listeners, how are you? We're so glad to have you.
Very well. I'm a little bit ashamed for the long introduction, but doing well. Thank you.
You know, you shouldn't be ashamed. You should be proud, my man. You know, what we're trying to say is public-private strategies brings the best of the best to our constituents, and you are in that line. So what we really want you to talk about is we all think of Mastercard as something that's in our wallet that, you know, pays for our online shopping and our various activities. Why is Mastercard interested in opportunity zones? And how does the opportunity zone effort fit into Mastercard's commitment to inclusive growth? How'd you all get into inclusive growth?
Thank you, Jane. That's a great question, and thank you everyone for joining. I think it starts with the realization that no company can be successful in a failing world and in a failing economy. So at the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, we believe that the benefits of growth, the benefits of a growing economy, should be broadly shared. And after many years of working on people and segments of the population that have been left behind through financial inclusion and other means, and working to support small and micro businesses and growing businesses to do better, we are now expanding the scope of the work of the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth to place-based economic development, to thinking about not just people or businesses, but places, pockets of cities that have been left behind. And that's why I think it's a great conversation to have today. And what we do as a center is that we leverage the assets that the company has. We are the philanthropic hub of Mastercard, but we have access to our data scientists, to the very rich kind of aggregate and anonymized transactional data that we have, and to the talent of our people. And I want to give a shout out to all of the Mastercard colleagues, some of them on the line, that supported this work. This was by no means a one-person effort. So that's kind of where we start. And I just wanted to go to a slide, if I may, just to jump into the conversation, that has a quote from David Brooks, who is a New York Times columnist, which I think epitomizes this idea of places being left behind, but also of places being the unit of social change, and how we can work at the neighborhood level, at the community level, to try to bring people into the economy and to try to improve their conditions. And so when we started working on place-based economic development, we very quickly learned that the opportunity zone incentive was going to take effect. And we believe that this idea behind the opportunity zone incentive, at the heart of it, is a similar idea to ours. How do you take this almost 9,000 neighborhoods, and how do you make sure that these places that are home to about 10% of the U.S. population where we know that about a third of their inhabitants are children that have twice the poverty rate of the average census tract, how do you create the conditions for investment, for business growth, but ultimately for inclusive growth, for the type of growth, as I was mentioning, that benefits everyone? So what we did very simply is we went around the country. I'm very happy to see folks on the line that we spoke to in those visits that we did to cities like Erie, Pennsylvania, New Orleans, Oklahoma City, Alabama, in Birmingham. And what we learned, two things. One was that the Opportunity Zone incentive has been taken as a great addition to the policy toolkit by people who do economic development at the local level, by mayors, by investors. But the second thing is that there was a need to have more information and more data, particularly to be able to tell the unique story of each of these communities, of each of these neighborhoods. So data that was at the census tract level and not averages at the city level or at the county level. So we came back to the team when we came back to our many partners on the ground. We partnered with organizations like the Accelerator for America, who are helping cities put together an investment prospectus, the Governance Project with their last mile solutions, the Center on Rural Innovation, the Urban Institute, and others. And we posed the question, how do we measure inclusive growth at the neighborhood level? And in that way, how do we know if the Opportunity Zone incentive is benefiting these communities? And so what we put together, and this is kind of the first version of it, and we're very open to feedback, and that's why we're doing this webinar, is this thing called the Inclusive Growth Score. And we learned a few things by doing that. So we learned that, in fact, opportunity zones are not just have twice the poverty rate of the average census tract, but they show about half of the average population growth rate nationally. Their residential values have grown by only a third as much as the average residential value. They show 10 to 15% less access to things like internet subscriptions, affordable housing, short commutes of less than 35 minutes. And they have 20% higher female poverty rates than the average census tract. So we did this analysis. We saw that these are the types of places where you would want to have a national incentive as big as the one that this bipartisan bill and that Ben Hobbs and his team at the White House have been pushing with their great work. But we understood very quickly that there was also a lot of diversity in the data of opportunity zones. So instead of just doing the analysis, we decided to create a tool that people could access themselves, where they could see the data of their own community, of their own city, of their own state, where they could compare their neighborhood with other neighborhoods, and where they could do kind of their own analysis for decision making. So before I go kind of deeper, I wanted to see, Jane, if Mayor Campbell, if you had another question.
Well, I think, Arturo, this is what you've described is really Mastercard's deep dive into figuring out the question that a lot of us have been asking, which is, how do we measure whether the Opportunity Zone incentive investments help the people who live in the communities, and what is the measure of that success? And that really is the heart of the question here, because what we know is that some of the ways that you measure the vitality of a community have such lagging indicators. Even the creation of eligibility to be an Opportunity Zone was based on census data, which is many years behind the actual situation in a community. And so what we're interested particularly in is how this inclusive growth score combines some of the traditional data metrics with some of the newer pieces of information that you uniquely have that allow a community to take a look at both the snapshot of today as a community might be trying to figure out what's the best thing that, as example, if I'm the mayor, I want to look at the opportunity zones in my city, and I want to determine what kind of side-by-side investments will I make, whether that's infrastructure investments, workforce development investments, low-income housing tax credits, historic tax credits, any of the variety of additional programs, because the opportunity zone incentive in and of itself is not enough to make a project happen. It is enough to make a good project a really much better project, but in order to make a good project in a lot of these areas, you have to invest a number of other public activities. And having this inclusive growth score can give people who are at the start of planning a better insight into the actual communities, because this is done by census tract. And a lot of the data, economic data, is more gathered by zip code, which is, they always say that, someone's zip code may determine their outcome. This is even more focused than that. So Arturo, I know that you have the capacity to sort of show us how to do an inclusive growth score in a real community. Can you demonstrate how this tool would work?
Yeah, yes, for sure. And so let me just say 2 points about your comments, because I think it's right on. I think the incentive by itself requires a lot more than just the investors looking for this investment. It requires capacity on the ground on the other side, on the side of the cities. And so we had been working with these partners. I want to say this is not just the Mastercard Center on its own. We've worked with experts like Bruce Katz and people at the Urban Institute and people at Brookings to come up with the right measures. And we've worked with the organizations that I just mentioned, and we created this platform which people can find at inclusivegrowthscore.com. And you can see some case studies, and you can link to all of these great partners and doers on the ground that are really trying to upgrade the policymakers' toolkit, the next generation of tools that can guide local strategy, that can help communities measure impact, that can empower policymakers and also investors to be more responsive to the needs of the community and to the changing economic landscape. And the reason that Mastercard does this, and you mentioned the data, the timeliness of the data, because we are sitting on really, really fascinating data, as you will see. And we believe as a company, we just published our data sharing principles globally. And one of the data sharing principles that Mastercard has put out there is that we have a responsibility not just to protect the data, but also to use it for social impact, to use the data, put it out there so that people can make better decisions, obviously in a safe way and following the data privacy principles. So if you want to go into inclusivegrowthscore.com and you click on almost anywhere, access the Inclusive Growth Score, it'll take you to a login page, Mayor Jane. We are just asking for an email address and a password. Please remember to, if it's the first time you do it, to click on sign up instead of sign in. And this is just so that in the future, when we add more features, there's going to be features that remember your list of opportunity zones and remember the comparisons that you've been making. So it'll just make it more tailored to your own experience. We're not keeping any other data. After this, you'll get into a guided tour of the tool and how it can be used. And after this guided tour, you can go directly into the map, and the map has all of the opportunity zones of the United States. It ranks on the left column, as you can see here, the opportunity zones by their total inclusive growth score, which is a score that goes from 0 to 100, where 100 means the highest inclusive growth. And it also color codes it. So the highest inclusive growth score from our 2017 to 2018 data is a 67 at the moment. We like to think that means there's a lot of room for all of these communities to find a path to inclusive growth and grow. You can search for any place in the country. Here we are going to one of the best cities in the U.S., I believe.
Best location in the nation.
Particularly in the early 2000s. And as you can see, it automatically ranks the score. So the highest score in what we see in the screen is a 58, which is that census tract there. And by the color coding, we can see, for example, that this has a lower score, an 18, right? So here you have, and I will describe exactly what makes up the score of 18 versus 48, right? And so let's use these two examples in East Cleveland as an example. If we go, you'll see the census tract number here. You'll see the population and the median income. And when you click Explore, you'll be able to go in deeper and see the different, the composition of the index, which is, the score is made out of 3 pillars. Place, which measures the growth of population, infrastructure, the built environment. The economy, which is about business growth, about jobs, and about spending. And then the community, which is well-being indicators, economic and social conditions. So the way that I would analyze this census tract with a 48 score, this line here means that it hasn't seen a change in score between 2017 and 2018. And in early 2020, we're going to publish the 2019 data, so we're going to have 3 data points. If we go to this one, you'll see that it's an 18 out of 100, but it came down 4 points from 2017 to 2018. So this is what this little thing here means. An interesting feature for those who are, I saw on the list, people like our friends from Opportunity Alabama who are looking at opportunity zones at the state level, is that while we are comparing this opportunity zone to all of the other 8,700 opportunity zones, you can also constrain the comparison to just the opportunity zones of the state. So this is the state of Ohio, and you see the score changes slightly as well. And so if we go deeper, the way I analyze these scores, I like this one because it's Little Italy and I like pizza. It's a score of 50. It's come down 1, so it was 51 in 2017. And which of the pillars have kind of produced this outcome? It's mostly the community well-being pillar that came down 5 points from the last measure to this. Actually, the economy pillar and place pillar have gone up by 1 point and by 3 points, respectively. You can go deeper. I'm sorry, the other thing is we separate the inclusion measures and the growth measures. Yes, go ahead, please.
Arturo, what's included in economic and social conditions?
So let me go deeper into the variables. If you go, just one last point of the overall dashboard is growth measures are those that measure kind of the level change. You can think of, are there more housing units? Are communities seeing growth in their spend overall over the year? Are we seeing more businesses? Those kinds of measures we consider growth measures. Is personal income going up, which comes from the census? And by the way, another shout out to the census friends who supported us in this endeavor as well. The inclusion scores, they measure the distribution of this change. So if we see growth in housing units, is there more affordable housing? If we see growth in businesses, is the ownership of these businesses minorities or women? So that kind of stuff is being measured on the inclusion side. So let me go very quickly because I really want to have Ben react and have some questions onto the 18 metrics that make up this inclusive growth score. Under the place category, we have this 6 net occupancy, which measures roughly population growth in the census tract. Residential real estate value, self-explanatory. Acres of parkland, so the percentage of the census tract that is green space. Affordable housing, the percentage of people who pay less than 30% of their income on rent. Internet access, the percentage of households with internet subscriptions, and then the commuting time, a percentage of people that have a short commute. On economy, we have the number of new businesses, the growth, the percentage of new businesses, the percentage growth in our index of spend. This is the total spend captured by Mastercard's data. Small business loans, the percentage of growth in small business loans. And then, as I said, the inclusion variables, which are the new businesses owned by minorities or women? What is the labor market engagement, which comes from HUD? And then the level of commercial diversity, which is how many types of businesses, of all of the possible types of businesses, can we see in this census tract? And we believe that a higher commercial diversity is generally a good thing. And finally,
Arturo, we're getting a question from the audience. One of the listeners asked, is there a way that you can tell from this data what is going on with the people who already live, sort of the micro group, the group that already live and work, may have small businesses in these neighborhoods? Are they getting increased opportunities? Are their businesses growing, or is it are they being replaced by other businesses? Is there a way to assess that out from this data?
Yeah, I think in the future we have tried to do there is a thing on the census databases that measure the number of businesses. There's like a business census. We haven't introduced that data yet, but those are one of the data sets that we're definitely looking into, to have not just the growth of the number of new businesses, but also perhaps introduce some data elements on the existing businesses. But I think that's a great question. And just to finish with the demo, the final batch of indicators measure what we call community, which is things that add to the well-being, from personal income, the percentage of females above poverty. So in this particular census tract, 50% of females are beyond the poverty line. In the state of Ohio, it's 61%. In the opportunity zones in the state of Ohio, it's 61%, which is not great. And then things like early education enrollment, health insurance coverage. And so when we bring all of this data together, and as the incentive kicks in and we go from year 1 to 2 to 3, we feel that this core, that this set of indicators will allow policymakers, community leaders, investors, and others to understand if the incentive is being positive for the communities that they're trying to serve. And this is kind of the demo. I'm very happy to answer questions.
Arturo, one of our listeners asked a question. He's an investor, and he said, as an investor, when he takes a look at the neighborhood he's potentially going to invest in, does he want that inclusive growth score to be a high number or a low number?
So the inclusive growth score on the baseline, which is the year 2018, the year just before the incentive, so that which is a year that we have published here. As I said, next year we'll have the first year of the incentive, which is 2019, gives a little bit of weight to the initial level of where the community was in some of these variables. So, for example, the level of personal income of the community, or the initial level of residential real estate value of the community has some weight. So it created the first score. But as years go by and we update this data annually or semi-annually, the weight is shifting towards growth and inclusion, and not the level necessarily. So what you want is, if you see it in this year, you'll get a little bit of the effect of where they started. So those communities that were a little bit further ahead will have a slightly higher score at the onset. But it's also taking into account the growth that they had between the last 2 years, right? And so, in general, a general economic rule is that growth is easier when you're further behind, right? So growth will tend to benefit communities that have less income, or that are more distressed, or that have more potential and opportunity to grow. So if I was an investor, and this is not Mastercard, this is me as an economist, I would be looking for that growth, particularly if I'm going to put the capital in for 10 years, which is what the opportunity zone requires. I would be looking for that growth, and I would be looking for that inclusive growth, which will be a more sustainable form of economic development for that community.
And one other question, Arturo, before we get Ben into the conversation, is one of our listeners asked, do you have this information for rural areas as well? And I know you do, because you have it for every opportunity zone.
Yes. So the answer is yes. We have it for all of the opportunity zones, including the 25% of them that are rural areas. You can actually also segment them by their urban-rural code, which is a spectrum that goes from the number 1 to the number 9 in the U.S. And we've seen that about half of the opportunity zones are between 1 and 5, which is quite urban. About 20% of them are on the tail end. So there's more urban opportunity zones, but we capture that. And we also have a partner. In one of the partners that you can find in the website is called the Center on Rural Innovation. And Corey, the Center on Rural Innovation, is producing an opportunity zone tool that is basically for rural areas, which I would invite the listener to look at as well.
And so for anybody who wants to really dive into this tool for their own communities, they can do that through the Inclusive Growth website. And in the follow-up from the webinar, you'll have all the details about how to get into that, because this has been put together really as a public service by the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, and it's available to anyone who wants to try to work with it. We just are doing this to introduce you to the concept. We're not, obviously, in an hour going to be able to resolve every single question people have, but we're going to do our best to try to raise the concern. But one of the things that is important about opportunity zones is that the opportunity zone incentive was crafted in Congress, and I was still working as the staff director for the Senate Small Business Committee when a lot of this discussion was going on, is it was set up so that it would work in cooperation and collaboration with state, local, and federal incentives. And it wouldn't be some of the programs you can't match federal money with federal money because this is a tax incentive rather than a program. You can use any of the other programs. And so in order to make the programs really accessible and available and with an eye toward the opportunity zones and what are the possibilities, the president and the White House put together a council, the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council. And today we have with us Ben Hobbs, who is a special assistant to the president for domestic policy. Mercifully, Ben is also an Ohioan from Alliance, Ohio. He's been in the White House since the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act became law. And most immediately before he came to the domestic policy group in the White House, he was with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so he is very much aware of how these programs can work together and what the administration is trying to do to put a spotlight on opportunity zones. So Ben, why don't you give us the perspective from the White House?
Well, thank you, Mayor Campbell, and thank you, Public-Private Strategies and Mastercard and Arturo for your presentation. It's great to be part of this call and great to be part of this exciting rollout. So, yeah, we've got a lot. I've been just listening in actually for the past half hour and taking notes and jotting things down myself. So this has just been truly informative, and I'm thrilled to see what Mastercard has put together here because, you know, starting at the top, you know, and I think you dove into it a little bit there, Mayor Campbell, that opportunity zones it's a paradigm shift for economic development and how economic development has traditionally been executed, you know, at least from the federal and even to some extent at the state level, where this is private sector driven. You know, always before, you know, leaders would have to apply for a grant, be it, you know, new markets tax credits or LIHTC or choice neighborhoods or an EDA grant or what have you across the federal government. You send in your application, you cross your fingers, you hope you got it right. Then you're granted the grant, and then, you know, not everybody wins, not everybody, you know, gets it. And then you hope to tailor it and put that into your community and catalyze some growth. The flip side here, and the really exciting piece about opportunity zones is, of course, that it's larger and the most aggressive than any other economic development tool ever legislated here at the federal level. And then it's private sector led, so anybody can take advantage of an opportunity zone tax incentive. You know, tomorrow, anybody on this call could create an opportunity fund. Tomorrow, anybody on this call could start an opportunity zone business and, you know, reap the rewards of this and start to turn their community around. So you don't have to come to DC and fill out any applications or anything in that sense to take advantage of this. So because of that, you know, education and tools like what Mastercard has put together here is imperative. You know, we have to educate both investors and business owners and local community leaders, you know, such as city council members and mayors and economic development officers across the country on how to utilize opportunity zones to transform their communities and how to connect opportunity zone financing with some of the existing programs, both at the federal and the state level. So to that goal, exactly like you said, Mayor, that the president last December, we're actually a week away from our 1-year anniversary, it was December 12th last year, signed the executive order creating the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council. And this council consists of every domestic agency in the federal government, everything from the EPA to housing, urban development, to commerce, to labor, to education, to transportation, the SBA, the Veterans Affairs, the list goes on and on. And we really have, I would say, three overarching goals. The first one being education. So to that point, we're want to partner and have calls like this with different stakeholders. We have an executive director, Scott Turner, who's traveling the country and giving the community and the public the tools necessary to take advantage of this tax incentive. We just launched opportunityzones.gov. I encourage everybody on the call to please check out opportunityzones.gov for full list of materials and resources on how to utilize opportunity zones. And then, like I said, Scott Turner, we're doing our educational outreach every single day with him on the road. I think he's gone to 40 different communities across the country. So that's on education. Then the second piece is we've asked all the agencies that are part of the council to target, coordinate, and streamline their resources and their existing programs towards opportunity zones. I'll go over just a few examples I think that are very telling. Well, we've recently, over the past year, completed 160 of these targeting exercises. So these are things such as making notice of funding availability changes, sub-regulatory changes, regulatory changes that will direct more of the public investment to opportunity zones. It'll streamline existing programs as they apply to opportunity zones, and they'll help catalyze increased private sector investment in opportunity zones. So this is a representation of our public sector commitment to the opportunity zone legislation. Just to run down a few that I think are worth telling about is the EPA recently this past year changed the evaluation criteria in their brownfield grants to give priority to opportunity zones. And as a result of that, this past year, 2/3 of all the EPA brownfield grants went to opportunity zones. We know that's a important catalyst to help some of these communities to have brownfields clean up and revitalize those and open them up for new investors like are on the phone here that can take advantage of that. The Department of Justice has actually targeted 50 of their competitive grant programs dealing with things on safe neighborhoods, gang remediation, drug policing, re-entry grants, youth engagement grants, all across the gamut to help the local police and the justice systems that are overseeing opportunity zones make sure that these communities are safe for investors, and investors and individuals feel as though they can put more resources into these and make them more walkable in that sense. The Department of Commerce, we changed the eligibility criteria for EDA grants. Now, if you're an opportunity zone, you automatically qualify for an EDA grant. Plus, this year now, you actually get an extra bonus points in your EDA application if the project is located in an opportunity zone. Housing and urban development, we actually have a global NOFA over there. So every one of HUD's competitive grant programs now has preference points for opportunity zone projects. We've also done some things in like FHA insurance. We've reduced the fees in FHA insurance for multifamily developments in opportunity zones. This way we can help drive more affordable housing into opportunity zones. The Department of Education, they've done about 10 of their different grant programs. One I'm particularly excited about is they recently put a new secretary priority on their charter school grants for opportunity zones. So if you're building a charter school in an opportunity zone, or you're financing a charter school with opportunity zone financing, you get extra bonus points for that matching grant from the federal government for the charter school. Department of Transportation, we understand that. I'll jump in and we can do questions a little bit later, but
we've got a pile of questions, Ben. And I really appreciate you. You've kind
we got a pile of questions. All right.
just a sense. Well, we have some for you and some for Arturo, and we'll play them back and forth because some of the questions kind of go across. And one of the questions that has been asked a couple different times in a couple different ways is that the Opportunity Zone incentive is focused on investors who have capital gains, and they want to invest those capital gains in a way that is going to be protected from federal tax or have a reduction in their federal tax, but their future investments will be free from federal tax. At the same time, they're looking for investments that are going to have clear returns. And so, Arturo, maybe you should start, and then Ben can fill in. As you look at the inclusive growth scores, is there anything in that can give you a predictor to whether an investment is going to generate a market rate return?
So, a couple different things, and I want to put a pin in one piece. So I gave a couple examples of all the different agency actions and the programs and how this integrates. And we can circle back to it before we forget. I wanted to take a second and talk about our measurement work stream as part of the council and how this Mastercard tool fits into that. And I think maybe this answers the question in part. We understand and totally agree with all the sentiments that, measuring of opportunity zones and their effectiveness to actually transform these communities is paramount. This is, a government expenditure, frankly, and we want to make sure that the taxpayers, that we're getting the return on investment, and that this program is successful at transforming these communities and giving the residents that are there new opportunities. So to that end, we're really excited. We have a new draft form out from the IRS that we'll be looking to finalize here soon, that asks all qualified opportunity zone funds will be reporting the employer identification number of the businesses they're investing in, and they'll be required to report how much money is going into each census tract that they're investing in. So from that, we're kind of excited that we'll know a little bit about the different industry makeup that Opportunity Zone investments are going towards, and we'll actually be able to start to develop kind of a heat map of where the dollar amounts, where the Opportunity Zone investments are flowing. Are they going rural? Are they going urban? Are they going suburban, northeast, or interior, or what have you? So we're really excited about that, and we'll hopefully have some of those numbers coming into the next year when tax filing starts happening. But then we're also working across the entire federal government to use the tools we have and the data we have to measure the effectiveness of opportunity zones, like labor participation, unemployment, wage growth or decline, and affordable housing numbers, and really similar to what the Mastercard here has developed here. And so I think the exciting thing about this is exactly that this tool is going to help the investors know that, okay, this community clearly has, potentially an untapped market on their social capital. Or their workforce is actually, very well, educated, but there's some gaps here in the infrastructure side. Or maybe, there's great infrastructure, but maybe there's some gaps here on the workforce. Or, and it helps investors and communities, I think, identify the gaps and the opportunities for investment and how to catalyze more investment. But Arturo, I want to turn it over to you as well for that question.
I don't think I can add much more than you, Ben, but I think from our view, as I said or alluded to before, if you're looking for returns, I think there's nothing in the long term that secures kind of good performance than equitable growth and sustainable growth, and where more and more people are included in the process of economic growth. That de-risks, we know that de-risks investment. We know that that's great for the community. And so, when all the boats lift together with the tide. I think that's the answer where you're looking for.
Arturo, I think that that is a pretty well recognized economic strategy, and makes a lot of sense when you look at it from the perspective of a community, whether that's an elected official or an economic development person or a community activist. One of the things that you can look at, the opportunity zone incentive, is it's a tax incentive for an investor to make an investment in a project that's ready. And so in the near term, you see the investments in the communities that are already developing. As you've developed the inclusive growth score and are looking at the growth over time, how can this tool be used to really create a conversation between investors who have never really looked at some of these communities as having any strengths, and the inclusive growth toolkit sort of help, whether it's a community group or a municipal official, to say, you don't really know that, in fact, in Collinwood, in Cleveland, Ohio, there are enormous number of strengths. It's got great highway access, this, that, or the other. And that's true for each. I, of course, use Cleveland because it's my home and what I know best. But there are many communities in Cleveland that have been neglected. And investors just they're not sure where they are. They have never been there. And if they have heard of them, they've only heard about, the latest trouble that happened in that community. And so how can the inclusive growth toolkit help people to identify the strengths in the community?
So I'm going to try to be very careful and very pragmatic about the uses of the tool, but give you some real examples of conversations we've had. I think that the first thing that this tool can do for both the community leader, the mayor, but also the investor, which I think is needed here, is to move beyond averages. I think that even averaging a zip code can hide a lot of information, a lot of nuance about what the particular community looks like. And sometimes there are positive surprises when you move beyond those averages. So I think matching the data that we put out in the tool to the level of granularity of the incentive, which is census tract, is going to benefit this information flow. It's going to allow people to tailor their interventions to understand, as Ben was saying, what are the exact needs of this or that community? What are the opportunities in things like early childhood education? What are the complementary investments that a real estate developer or a business investor could be adding to their portfolio that could actually benefit the community and make the community be more open to them investing? Those are the types of discussions that one can have with the data set. On the second leg, when we've worked with cities like Erie, Pennsylvania, when we worked with Oklahoma City, in Louisville, for example, when you have a mayor that has 23 opportunity zones, what we are trying to do is change the narrative that sometimes even the city itself has about itself. The east side does better. The west side is no place for a grocery store. Those kinds of conversations. When you come in with data, you can tell a story not just about past performance. You can tell a story about potential, right? You can in a way measure through like the spending growth variable that I showed you, through looking at the last few years of business growth, you can start to see how the future of that community will look instead of just focusing on the past, and that can change the mindset of capital owners, of investors, of city planners, etc.
That's very helpful. One of the questions that our listeners asked, and I think, Ben, you really referred to this when you referred to the Opportunity Zone website that you all have created. On that Opportunity website, are there details about how people could find out, for example, the Department of Transportation programs that are especially targeted for Opportunity Zones, or the USDA programs? Is that all available through that website?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of that question. On what exactly is on the website?
If someone were to go to the website, would they be able then, you spoke quickly and, very helpfully about Commerce has done this and Transportation has done that and USDA has done that and HUD has done that.
Yeah.
Is there like a link there that someone comes in and they're, I'm really interested in the USDA programs. Can they access that through the Opportunity Zone website? Would that be the best way?
I'm glad. Yep, I'm glad you asked, and I'll start one step before that. I think after hearing Arturo speak and looking at this tool, I can imagine there'll be a mayor out there, or an economic development officer, or an investor that'll look at this Mastercard tool. They'll see that this particular city that they might be interested, or this zone that they might be interested in investing in, maybe has a shortfall on some necessary infrastructure, or something, or maybe it's affordable housing. Then they go to opportunityzones.gov, and if you click on the local leaders tab, on there we have listed all 160 plus different programs that we have targeted or streamlined in one way, shape, or form towards opportunity zones. But then even the better news is it's not just a giant list. It also, we broke it down, instead of breaking it down by agency, which can be incredibly confusing because, as folks probably know or don't know, but, USDA, for instance, has programs that deal with entrepreneurship. They have programs that deal with infrastructure, and they have programs that deal with workforce training. So what we've done on the website is actually, instead of breaking it down by agency, we broke it down by 4 pillars: entrepreneurship, safe neighborhoods, economic development, and workforce training and education. So those 4 pillars, so you can go in there and click the pillar that you need. Economic development falls under kind of the infrastructure side there. And then you can find across all the different agencies, all the different programs that we've targeted to opportunity zones that deal with infrastructure. And then you have some notes on there that say when the applications are open or when they're closed, and a link taking you straight to the agency website where you can find the application process. So it's all right there.
Well, that's great. All right, we promised we would do this until 3, and it is coming close to 3. So I want to thank Arturo and Ben for your time and your participation, and for those of you who are on the webinar throughout the country, we're happy to have you sign in. We will distribute the slides. I hope that you will sign up to use the Inclusive Growth tool. It's www.inclusivegrowthscore.com, which will be in the slides if you forget it. And we also are happy to have you email the public-private strategies. We'll try to direct your questions to the right person. The White House Opportunity Zone website gives us a spotlight into the federal programs. And if there's one thing to think about, it's that we all have an opportunity, and it's hard to talk about opportunity zones without saying opportunity too many times because it gets confusing. But this focus on communities in need gives us the potential to join hands between the public sector and the private sector to really seek investments that are going to make a difference in the lives of the people who live and work in those communities. And the inclusive growth score, giving us a snapshot of where they are today and being developed over time, will be able to show something about what happens to the actual communities and is there a positive change. So that in this questioning that goes on about what is this incentive really doing, is it really helping the communities, the inclusive growth tool gives us an opportunity over the long haul to watch that happen. And we're very appreciative to Mastercard and to you, Arturo, for having developed this and developing it in a way that can be shared by everyone. Thank you very much. We look forward to the next opportunity to share with you. Bye.